Live from the studios of Radio Shalom, 1650 AM in Montreal, Canada.
Today, our guest is Sinem Tezyapar, is a political and religious commentator, peace activist, and an executive producer at a Turkish TV network. She is a columnist, and her articles are being published regularly in the international media, including Jewish publications like the Jerusalem Post, Jewish Press, the Jewish Journal, Arutz Shiva, and so on. She's also the spokesperson of a prominent international interfaith organization, as well as coordinator for the international relations with political and religious leaders. She is working with interparliamentary and non-governmental organizations for the establishment of the United Nations Permanent Forum for a Culture of Peace and Global Ethics. As a Muslim, she denounces terrorism, anti-Semitism, and all kinds of violence. She often talks about Turkey's role in the region and the problems of the Jews and the Christians in the Middle East, relations between Turkey and Israel, the Iran-Israel conflict, the latest situation in the Middle East, and concerns about the Western world, about Islam and Muslims in general. She's been influential in setting up many meetings and conferences between religious and political leaders of Turkey and Israel, including Interior Minister Eli Yishai, Deputy Minister Yitzhak Cohen, Deputy Minister Yehu Kara, Knesset Member Nissim Zev, Chief Rabbi Israel Meir Lau, and so on. And as well as Sinem Tezyapar, again, is an executive producer at a Turkish television network in Turkey. And joining us live from Istanbul, Turkey, how are you? And welcome to the Money and Business Show, Sinem.
Hi, Sam. It's always a pleasure to speak with you, and greetings to all from Istanbul, Turkey.
Yes, and I hope it's not too late, right?
No, not at all.
Good.
Not for me.
Good. You know, I went on your website, Sinem, and it was fascinating how beautiful your website is. I mean, you spoke about peace and religion and so on, but you had one quote there which I really love, and I want you to explain to me what you're talking about. You said, democracy is not just about the majority in votes. Democracy also requires plurality. It is important to provide freedom of expression for all opinions. Only then the quality of democracy will increase. That's a beautiful quote. What do you mean by that?
Thank you, Sam. I think this is also the definition of advanced democracy. It is very crucial that people from all walks of life can find the freedom to express themselves. In some countries in the Middle East, although the leaders are elected and they come into power via democratic means, some of them think that they can impose their own ideology or faith to their citizens, and they forget about the expectations of the others who have not voted for them.
Okay.
That's why we need secularism as well to implement democracy in the fullest sense. And compared to other countries in the region, Turkey is in a far better situation in terms of democratic understanding. But of course, it's still far from being ideal as well. However, it's indeed progressing. And I have to mention, this is also one of the essential common features between Turkey and Israel. They are both secular countries. They are both governed by democracy. I think Israelis and Turks are cherishing this mutually because this obviously provides freedom of speech, freedom of belief, and worship for all.
And there's a religious aspect also to it, Israel and Turkey, right?
Yes, they have their majority of the people are religious. So, and when the state is at equal distance to its citizens, regardless of their faith and opinion, I think only then people can be treated as first-class citizens and have equal rights.
So let's go back here, what's happening in Turkey. Have the Arab uprisings made their way to Turkey? It seems that the Turkish people took a page out of the Arab people's playbook with a large numbers of demonstrating, or demonstrations in the streets in order to bring about political change. The protesters seem to be made up of more secular Turks than Islamists, affiliated with the opposition Republic People's Party. Is that right?
Sam, I will have to disagree with this.
Okay.
First, the Arab Spring analogy is incorrect. Turkey is a democratic secular country, and it would be very unfair to compare Turkey with dictatorships of Gaddafi, Assad, or Mubarak.
Okay.
People in the Arab countries are still fighting for their fundamental rights, and they still lack their civil liberties. So their uprising is against tyrannical regimes. This is definitely not the case in Turkey. As you know, the whole protest thing started by young protesters to protect their green space, which I fully support. And at later stages, this peaceful protest was hijacked by illegal communist factions. they resorted to provocation and vandalism. And I have to remind that within these groups, there were DHKPC, which is a Marxist-Leninist terror group that made the terror attack to U.S. Embassy last February, and also PKK, which is another terrorist separatist organization. So we have to discriminate between the two. And it is also not secular versus Muslim situation. The motives of the right-wing groups is very diverse. Some want a more inclusive democracy, some want green space, some want communist revolution, some have reasonable criticisms for the government. So it's a diverse picture.
So basically, it's the communists that are protesting the most. It just doesn't make sense.
No, it's not about number. The communists are maybe small, but they have the organizational power to provocate masses and to mobilize people against the government. So this was mostly provocational thing.
So what about the jailing of the generals and the political activists and the limitation of alcohol and smoking? Is that why they were protesting?
Not actually. Yes, there are sometimes misperceptions. People feel it as a concern, but sometimes it doesn't. The facts are not like that. Regarding freedom of press and speech in Turkey, I think there is a major misunderstanding because the foreign media reflects it in a very different direction. But the journalists who are in prison are not imprisoned because of their journalistic activities. They have indeed committed other crimes, meaning that they have either violated the laws, like being a member of armed terrorist organization, having illegal arms, aiding the terrorists, and so on. Actually, this is the same for the jailed military officials. Some are brought to justice because they made a military coup in 1980, and some others are put on trial because of plotting a civil war to make another military intervention to overthrow a democratic government.
Okay.
So these are very solid evidence against them. And you have to acknowledge the fact that there is separation of powers in Turkey, meaning AK Party government cannot interfere to judicial rulings. And lastly, regarding your points about alcohol, it's not like a ban, it's a time regulation, which is not different than any North American country or EU country. So the retail sales of alcohol in shops are only limited, yes.
So there's a limitation. In other words, there's a curfew, like at 10 o'clock or 11 o'clock. Is that it? Is that what you're talking about? There's a certain time?
Yes,
okay.
Exactly.
Now, let me ask you, we have a couple of minutes to our break. Sinem, isn't it difficult to find out what is going on in Turkey? Because Turkey does not have that much freedom of the press, and its media are not broadcasting much about the protest. Am I correct to say that?
At first, regarding the protest, they were a little bit unsure about what was going on. So this was only 30 young protesters in over 13 trees being uprooted. So they didn't see it as a major event, but in the later stages, they were following the protests. However, the live broadcast vehicles of mainstream media were attacked, vandalized. So like the ones CNN Turkish, NTV Turkish, and the journalists were in a risky position by being just there. So it's not about not reflecting the protests, but it was a little bit how they were vandalized during their live broadcast.
And what about the freedom of the press? Is there freedom of the press in Turkey? Before we go to the break in about 30 seconds.
Yes, there is. I think of course there is still place to progress. But by the way, the AK Party government has changed the laws so that there is more freedom of speech, because there were other articles in the constitution which did not allow people to talk about the regime or the system of Turkey and so on. These kind of issues are at the moment discussed very freely in our media at the moment, which is a very, very different situation than a decade ago.
Good. So, Sinem, just stay on the line. We're going live here to Istanbul, Turkey. We have Sinem Tezyapar, is a political religious commentator, peace activist, and also is an executive producer at a Turkish TV network. Today, our topic is Turkey, a model of democracy and Islam, and the roadmap to culture and peace in the Middle East. Welcome. Welcome again. By the way, if someone wants to go on your website and read a little bit more about you, how do we find you?
They can reach me via my Facebook, Twitter accounts, and my website is www.sinemtezapar, tezyapar.com.
Good. Okay. And
My name and surname together.
Okay, so Sinem Tezyapar, right?
Yes. By the way, you are the best Turkish pronouncer.
Really?
Yes, indeed.
So good. I can pronounce your name right. Good. Sinem, I know we spoke about the Arab Spring and the outcry of the people yearning for democratic rights and freedoms. You spoke about all that, but the majority also want their governments to reflect their religious values as well, right?
Yes. For instance, in Turkey, AK Party has a support of conservative votes, and they have their expectations. And just like the difference of Obama and Bush administrations, there will always be differences in terms of emphasis to certain issues. However, this does not give them or anyone the right to impose their worldview, faith, or morality to others. It doesn't give them the right to interfere to our personal decisions. Despite the fact that they represent a certain group of people, they still should not be telling us what is wrong or right. I think the governments should give emphasis on education and public awareness programs and leave the rest to people's decisions, because we select our leaders to serve, not to design our lives.
So, Sinem, I want you to comment. We're going to be listening to a clip in maybe about 10 seconds or less, but I want you to comment on this, an economic miracle under threat has been going on. But let's hear a clip. Go ahead.
Okay.
It started as an environmental protest. People who didn't want an Istanbul park turned into a shopping mall. What it became has had an impact far beyond that. Turkey's image, its economy, they're both at risk from a growing protest movement and the government's heavy-handed response to it. The stock market saw its biggest drop in a decade. Yields on some government bonds jumped as much as 2% in less than a month, and the Turkish lira fell to an all-time low against the dollar, prompting the central bank to intervene. Sensing the risk to his economy, Prime Minister Erdogan was in no mood to negotiate.
The interest rate lobby exploited my nation for years, but no longer. I am telling this to whomever. One bank, two banks, three banks. You have started this fight. You will pay for it. Those who try to bring the stock exchange down, we will throttle you.
It's the biggest challenge to Erdogan's 10-year reign, a time which has seen exceptional economic growth and strong support at the ballot box.
Sinem, we just heard a clip here. If that would happen, the stock market also would crash here in Canada and United States, of course, And you're right, there's a fear out there that maybe somebody's controlling the stock market, but we're not getting into that, maybe to another subject. But Sinem, is the ongoing street protest and the government's response to them, is it affecting the Turkish economy at this point?
Sam, it's interesting that you are bringing up this issue, because just last week our finance minister, Mr. Mehmet Şimşek, said that there is no significant impact or permanent damage to our economy.
None?
Yes, very minimum.
Okay.
People were inclined to associate the fall in the stock exchange to demonstrations. However, as our finance minister also explained, it was mostly an outcome of the U.S. Federal Reserve's changing statements regarding the quantitative easing. There has been very limited outflows from equity and bond markets. It is around, to be specific, 1.2 to $1.3 billion when compared to net inflows, which is $24 billion over the last 12 months.
Wow.
So, in short, yes, there is no liquidity leaving Turkey, and the economy is still in a solid state.
That's amazing, because we usually, when there's demonstrations like in Egypt and anywhere in the Middle East, you usually see the stock market going down, liquidity leaving, but the Turkish economy is strong enough to withstand demonstrations like this because of the democracy and the system that they have.
Yes, indeed. Maybe I can give some numbers, because during the 10 years of ruling of AK Party governments, there has been an exceptional economic growth. The inflation has come down from 30% to 6.6%. Exports are up from 36 billion a year to 153 billion. And the GDP per capita is now about $10,000, which was not more than 3,500.
Wow.
Yes, indeed. And as a side note, the opposition gathered at least 1 million of people for a mass rally just before the last elections. However, AK Party raised their votes to 50% and the economy kept growing. So we are resistant to these our economy is resistant to such protests. And on the other hand, the protests have faded anyway.
Yeah. So what I'm trying to the point that I'm making is that there's demonstrations, but just as there'll be demonstrations here in Canada or United States, there's very little impact on the economy. That's what you're saying. Yes,
indeed. So money is in the markets in Turkey, and nothing has changed. Nothing significant has changed.
Wow, yes. Your English is impeccable. I just want to say we do understand. It's very good.
Yes, I have my limitations, but
well, that's good. Where did you learn English, by the way? Where did you learn English?
In college, in university, okay. And because I needed that for my activities besides work, business.
Good. Okay, that's great. Sinem, on May 9th, 2013, we're going to go we're going to be talking about a few more things about the. See, I just jumped a question here for some reason over here, but what I really wanted to talk about is, we're talking about on May 9th, 2013, you set up an international conference in Istanbul, Roadmap to Culture and Peace in the Middle East, right? It was called the Track 3 Diplomacy towards the development of culture of peace in the Middle East. Can you tell us a little bit more of what you're doing? And, religious leaders went there and diplomats and the message that came across it, by the way.
Okay, so the Track 3 diplomacy, which is also known as cultural diplomacy, is people-to-people diplomacy. So it involves the individuals, non-governmental organizations' efforts to achieve a positive change in the political arena. For this specific conference, I worked with, for instance, the Institute for Cultural Diplomacy from Berlin and the Interparliamentary Coalition for Global Ethics from Israel. And a UN top official was also present in the conference to see how this kind of meeting could be a model for a new platform within the UN body. Because most of the time, politicians work alone and they disregard the influence of political leaders in conflict resolutions. However, I think the role of religion in politics, especially for the Middle East, it's very, very crucial because religion here is in the life and soul of Middle East. And in our case, my goal was to promote peace and brotherhood via these meetings, conferences, generating media exposure to shape the public opinion so as to assist political steps. Because, Sam, as you know, peace cannot be imposed to people, and this cannot be achieved via called political meetings. We need spiritual leaders who can be influential in shaping people's souls so that they are more capable, more open to peace and understanding the other side.
So you organize all this, right? The cultural diplomacy, you had Knesset member Rabbi Yitzchak Cohen and you had Rabbi Yitzchak Dayan. I mean, you had some big names over here. I'm looking at Dr. Sheikh Ramzi, executive member of the Muslim Council of Britain. You had some heavy hitter here. Knesset member Rabbi Nissim Zev, founder of the Shas Party, chairman of the Knesset and caucus, all in Turkey to talk about the cultural diplomacy and peace in the Middle East. That took a lot of effort.
Indeed.
That took a lot of effort, and that's why when I looked at your website and I read it, I said, "Wow, that's amazing what you just did here." There's not that many people that can do that. To have all these, the rabbis and the Knesset members and so on. Now let's talk to a region that we all know about: Israel's export to Turkey and high-tech manufacturing machinery and parts, water irrigation systems, plastic and chemicals. Turkey and Israel signed a free trade agreement in the year 2000. The annual exports to Israel were about 650 million. Israel's export to Turkey reached about 475 million in the first quarter of 2013. And it seems like it's increasing. The trade amount about 4 billion last year. Are we looking at an increase this year in GDP?
Hopefully so. The economic relations between Turkey and Israel has been flourishing despite the political tension, and it keeps getting bigger. The mutual trade volume was over 4 billion in 2012, and the figure is expected to reach 5 billion in 2013. 2013. With that number, we are talking about 25% increase.
Yeah, there's been an increase of 25% between trade between Turkey and Israel from last year?
Yes, indeed.
With all that's been happening with the political instability and so on, a 25% increase. Wow.
Yes, correct. Actually, Israel's commercial relationship with Turkey has never been better. Maybe just to give some insight about the development of our economic relations.
Yes, go ahead.
In 1996, Israel has signed a free trade agreement with Turkey. This was indeed a historic agreement because it was Israel's first such agreement with a Muslim country. By 2000, all custom duties concerning the industrial products have been abolished. And since then, there has been a steady progression in trade and investment. Turkey, as the 16th largest economy in the world, with a 1 trillion GDP and with a population of 76 million, Turkey is indeed a key market for Israel. And at the moment, Turkey is the 6th largest export destination for Israel.
The 6th? Wow.
Yes, yes.
Okay.
And for me, this is also an indication that Turks and Israeli people have never accepted the political tension because Israeli people know very well that there is no ground for hostile feelings in reality.
That's right, because what would happen if Israel and Turkey, there's hostilities, mutually they can benefit each other. The exports, as you mentioned, a 25% increase from last year. It means since the flotilla, what happened with that political news there at that time where Israel had to actually apologize for that, has increased. So they understand each other that it's extremely, extremely important. Also,
Yes.
I'm going to give you a quote from Stanley Fischer, the governor of the Bank of Israel, or the ex-governor now, or he's going to move on. He says he does not underestimate the economic importance of Turkey to Israel. Shortly after Turkey expelled Israel's ambassador, he said, in terms of the sophisticated economies in the region, which is where we export the most successfully, Turkey is the most important. So he knows the importance of Turkey. But also, I think your prime minister has been here in the White House, and I have a clip of that. The Turkish prime minister was in the White House in the Rose Garden with the president of the United States. I think it was last month. So we're just going to hear a clip. Go ahead.
Okay.
This visit reflects the importance that the United States places on our relationship with our ally Turkey, and I value so much the partnership that I've been able to develop with Prime Minister Erdogan. Today we discussed the many areas in which our countries cooperate, including Afghanistan, where our troops serve bravely together, the G20, where we promote our shared prosperity, and Iran, where we agree it is critical that we do not see that country acquire a nuclear weapon and potentially trigger an arms race throughout the region. Given our shared interest in peace, I want to note the Prime Minister's efforts to normalize relations with Israel. This will benefit both the Turkish and Israeli people and can also help us make progress on a two-state solution, including an independent Palestinian state. Today we focused on three areas that I want to highlight. First, we agreed to keep expanding trade and investment. Over the past 4 years, our trade has surged, and U.S. exports to Turkey have more than doubled. As the United States pursues a new trade and investment partnership with the EU, I want to make sure that we also keep deepening our economic ties with Turkey. So we're creating a new high-level committee that will focus on increasing trade and investment between our two countries and will help fuel Turkish innovation.
Sinem, we just heard the President of the United States highly speak of Turkey. And how is the Islamist model different in Turkey as compared to Pakistan, Saudi Arabia, Syria, or Iran?
I think the most important difference is that there is no compulsion, no coercion, suppression, or else in the name of religion in Turkey. Modern understanding, contemporary interpretation of Islam is dominant in our country. And another important point that I have to mention is that radicalism, terrorism in the name of Islam cannot find any ground in Turkey. The radical views are very, very small in numbers. So these are very important. Yes.
Because it's a secular view in some ways, right? That's why. It's not like Islamist.
Yes, secular, democratic country, but also the people are open-minded and they are educated in that direction, not in the direction of radicalism.
And also they're business-like too. They want business. They know that if something happens to Turkey, their economy is going to hurt at the end of the day.
Yes, but the concern is not about business. The general atmosphere in Turkey is very modern and open-minded. To give a few examples in terms of practice when compared to Saudi Arabia, for instance, there are no synagogues or churches. Torah and gospel is prohibited. Jews and Christians can't make a religious ceremony in Saudi Arabia, and this is completely different in Turkey. The Christians, Jews have full right to express their belief. They can worship as they wish. They can carry their religious symbols. They can pray in their synagogues or churches without feeling any pressure or discrimination, which I find very important.
Excellent. Good.
Yes, and as you know, another difference is an Israeli citizen cannot travel to Iran or Saudi Arabia, but Israelis are always welcome to Turkey. They can travel freely without being asked for a visa. Planes between Turkey and Israel are flying with full capacity 4 times a day.
Yeah, I know. I see the Turkish Airlines back and forth. Like when I was in Israel, I saw many of the airlines, and I said, Turkey, wow, that was new to me to see that. But yes, you're right.
And in countries like Saudi Arabia or others, women are forced to dress in a specific way. But in Turkey, you can see all kinds of women sitting together with equal rights without being discriminated. A headscarf woman, a woman with headscarf or a woman with revealing clothes, they can both get along very well. And we can give many examples, but I think you get the general atmosphere here.
I do get it. Sinem, the Arab world is awakening, especially Tunisia, Egypt, Libya, and Syria, countries trying to change their destiny. Turkey has been shown as a model instead of those authoritarian governments and corrupt systems. According to 2 surveys conducted by the Turkish Economic and Social Studies Foundation, and KU Research Limited in 7 Arabic countries, 61% of the survey respondents and 66% of the survey respondents think that Turkey can be a role model for the other Muslim countries in the Middle East. Sinem, can Turkey be a role model for the other Islamic Muslim majority countries?
Yeah, I would say a full yes for this. And for the percentage, I think it keeps rising day by day. The sympathy for Turkey is growing. Their expectations, their hopes to see Turkey as a leader is also growing. First of all, Turkey has destroyed the preconception that democracy and Islam is incompatible. The nature of Turkey's regime is secular, pluralist, and democratic, as we have been talking. But what happened in the last decade is we saw a new party which comes from an Islamic tradition to lead Turkey, this secular country. And so with this situation, I think Turkey provides the best answer to the biggest question in the Islamic world. Can Islam and democracy go together as it does in the West?
So you say yes. Yes. So the answer is yes.
Yes.
And we're seeing as a democracy, as there's secularism, is flourishing in Turkey, but also at the same time, the economy of Turkey is flourishing. So it all works.
Yes, indeed.
When you start throwing out terrorism out in the world and talking, you want a war and you want to, obliterate Israel as a country, like coming from Iran, and not having people, flying to Saudi Arabia. All that adds up to the, tensions, and the economies don't really work that well. But proof.
You're fully right. Yes. Actually, Turkey has lowered their military expenses a lot in the past decade. So it showed they spent all those money to industry, to education,
right,
to social security, and so on.
And education.
Yes, indeed. And I just want to add something,
yes,
because
go ahead.
It is important.
Go.
People were curious about what is happening to Turkey. Is Turkey's axis is shifting to east and so on. Turkey is still a NATO ally and a loyal friend to West. This has not changed and it will not change. But Turkey also realized her responsibilities as a natural leader in the Turkic Islamic world. So Turkey as a soft power, like an elder brother, at the moment can indeed be a balance, a unifying entity against radicalism and terrorism. not just for itself, but for the whole region. So Turkey's new foreign policy is in the direction to be a bridge between East and West and to serve a model to inspire the Muslim majority Arab countries for a new vision, which is a model where Muslims live with democracy and with enjoying their fundamental freedoms and human rights.
But Sinem, we're almost done here. We have maybe a few minutes left or whatever, but I have a few more questions. Is Turkey the best example of how Islam and democracy can coexist?
Yes, definitely, Sam. The democratic secular nature of my country helps to avoid the hypocrisy in the name of religion as well. This is very important because when people are forced to live in a certain way rather than making their own decisions by their own free will, this leads to hypocrisy. But in my country, I live by my religion with my own free will in the most beautiful form. I interfere in no one's affair and no one can interfere in mine. So democracy is being lived in the most perfect way as a Muslim majority country. And also, this is the spirit of the Quran as well, because God says there is no compulsion in religion. This is very clear commandment and will be valid for all time. So Islam forbids not only physical pressure, but also the slightest coercion. And in other words, a Muslim's reply should be to you your religion and to me mine. So these are clear evidence that democracy is in the essence of Islam. And Turkey is practicing this kind of understanding.
So they can coexist, Islam and democracy, because some of the countries like Iran or Saudi Arabia or Pakistan, they should follow the Turkish model so that they can succeed and the people can have good jobs and unemployment will decrease, and also there'll be peace in that region instead of like having nuclear weapons and buying arms. They can actually educate and use that money for other purpose. But Sinem, it is a sad fact that there has been so much misunderstanding and suspicion between the Jewish and Muslims so many years, I would say. In fact, there are several common factors that should have served as basis for both communities to have cordial relations. Through the reality of the ground, it's unfortunately different. The most important belief that should bind, actually, us, the Jewish people and the Muslims together as brothers, is the faith of one God, Hashem, one God in the universe. Both Jews and Arabs also have, the fathers of Abraham. So we have Ishmael and Isaac. Why do Muslims fear the Jewish people, and can Muslim and Jews coexist in this world?
First, yes, indeed, we have so much in common when compared to our differences. Actually, that I began studying Torah and the other Judaic scriptures for this reason, to find out our common beliefs. We have
who did you study with?
I had the privilege to study with some rabbis.
Wow. Okay.
So,
from Israel or Turkey or
Israel.
Wow, that's good to hear. Okay,
yes,
so go on.
And as you stated, Jews and Muslims believe in one God. This is very, very essential pillar for Islam and Judaism. We also both believe in the same prophets. We believe in the hereafter. We share the same virtues like honesty, compassion, humility, mercy, self-sacrifice, and so on. And to answer your question regarding if Muslims and Jews can coexist, yes, a full yes again. Muslims can live in harmony with Jews, and Muslims are not at war with Jews. We have to make this clear. According to Quran, Jews have a special status as people of the book, and Muslims can establish good relations with them through marriage or sharing food. Kosher food is also lawful for Muslims to eat. So from an Islamic perspective, there is no obstacle to have warm human relations with Jews.
Why this tension for so many years? We're looking at since 1500 years. Why this fear for both, Jews and Muslims? Why this fear? Where does it come from? Is it from the Quran? Is it coming from the Torah? Where is this all coming from?
It comes from the false interpretation of Islam. So
good point.
It is true that there is a widespread hatred
yes.
of Jews in the Muslim world. But however, this does not stem from the Quran itself, but from false interpretations of Quran. And because people are not living the true spirit of Islam, or they don't read the Quran with love and reason. Because first of all, Jews are the descendants of prophets. They are very valuable, and our Jewish brothers and sisters should know that there are pages of verses in the Quran that praise the Torah, Prophet Moses and other prophets and his followers. Yes, indeed.
In the Quran. Wow. Okay.
Pages of verses.
How come we don't know this? How come, we don't hear this? All we hear is whatever. Well, you know what I mean, the violence.
The reason is because people are misusing the Quran for their corrupt belief, either critical ignorance or hypocrisy or political agendas.
Let me ask you just a quick question before I get to the next one. Are there, how many types of Quran? I mean, is just one Quran, or there are different types of Qurans people read, or are there? I mean, we have one Torah. That's it. We just have one Torah. We have one.
Yes, we have one Quran.
Okay, you also have one Quran. Okay.
Yes.
Okay, and
translations might sometimes.
Okay, so it's in the translation you're talking about, right? Or misinterpretation, or
I'm talking about misinterpretation, not the translation.
The translation,
because if you take Quran as a whole, and if you read with the spirit of Islam, you can't make those judgments, there is no room for anti-Semitism in Islam. In short.
Very good point from your mouth to God's ear. Now, Sinem, I'm going to ask you a loaded question, and you don't have to answer if you don't want to. Okay? Can Muslims accept the right of the Jewish people to live in Israel or the Holy Land?
Actually, they should. First of all, it is against any conscience to tell Jews to go somewhere else. Jews have been expelled from Spain. They have been slaughtered in Europe. There has been enormous intimidation against them in many places all over the world. So I would like to ask, where do they have to go? Besides, these lands are places where their forefathers lived. The graves of their grandfathers are on these lands. As a Muslim, from an Islamic perspective, it is also confirmed by the Quran that they will be living in the Holy Land till the end of the world. In one verse from the Quran, God says, "And thereafter we said to the children of Israel, dwell securely in the promised land." So this is a verse from the Quran. So anyone telling otherwise would be contradicting with Quran. And in another verse, just to support my statement, the Prophet Moses says, "O my people, enter the Holy Land which Allah has assigned to you, and do not turn back." Again, this is a verse from the Quran. So it is Jews' most natural right to wish to live in their own Holy Lands.
And it's too bad we don't hear about all this. We always hear the negative part, but we just don't hear about all this. Which again, it's the news media and what we want to hear. But Sinem, we're just ending over here, and I'd love to have you a lot more. Hopefully you'll come back on again to the Money Business Show, Radio Shalom. It's been great to have you. A lot of information, and thank you very much. And I know it's late. It's about midnight in Turkey, so I want to thank you again for joining us live from Istanbul, Turkey. Thank you.
Thank you, Sam, to you for this opportunity. And with this occasion, I also want to reach out to Canada and all your listeners and say that in Turkey, we're doing everything we can to fight against terrorism, radicalism, anti-Semitism, and also bigotry and hatred, not just in Turkey, but in the whole region. We are using our intellectual means, which is the most powerful weapon that you can use against a false belief. So keep your prayers for our success.
Thank you, Sinem. And that was Sinem Tezyapar, live from Istanbul, Turkey, as a political and religious commentator, peace activist, and executive producer at a Turkish TV network. Again, my name is Samuel Izerzer for the Money Business Show, Radio Shalom.